Welcome, beautiful souls, to Ashram Talks. This is Atul Krishna Das. I am your host for today. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about karma yoga and specifically how we can apply the knowledge provided by Lord Krishna in leadership roles. And with that, we don't mean just like public office. I mean every single role in which you are influencing somebody. So you could think it as, how can I apply this as a parent? How can I apply this as a sibling? How can I apply this in my job or in my university, in my studies? So in your day-to-day activities, we move on in our lives in different kind of duties, and at some point, we're going to help others to grow. So today we are being joined with the wonderful Abhimanyu Wolf, who is going to be guiding us with the knowledge from the Gita. Welcome, Abhimanyu.
Thank you so much, Atul Krishnadas. I'm very privileged and fortunate to be here. And so yeah, as always, in the spirit um, of invoking and accepting divine leadership, I will offer my prayers to my divine masters and to the divine itself, and we will proceed from there. Sakshad haritvena samasta shastrayaruktasthata bhavyata eva sadbhi Kintu prabhorya priya eva tasya Vande guru shri charanaravindam Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasada Yasya prasada nagati kutopi Dhyayanstu vangstasya yashastri sandhyam Vande guru shri charanaravindam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha Patitanang pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right, and so our topic for today all about spiritual leadership, ancient principles for progressive leaders. We can start with the verse 19. We'll be doing a few verses today. For this one, um, Lord Krishna, he talks first about being free from the desire from specific results from our actions. He says, "Tasmata sakta satatang karyam karma samachara asakto hyacharan karma paramapnoti purusha." Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty. For by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. And so this, again, a very common theme in the Gita, working without attachment. And I think I've addressed in one of the previous ashram talks that on one hand, it sounds kind of impossible. How could I possibly act without attachment for the results? It'd be like, working without attachment for a paycheck or something like that. And it's more just recognizing the simple fact that my action alone is only one factor in the results coming about. And ultimately in the different factors of action, there's the endeavor, the performer, the senses, the field of activities, and the super soul. And so of those, again, there is the divine authority, the paramatma, the super soul, that is required to sanction the results of our activities. And so this does get into the topic of, ancient principles for leaders, because in ancient times, especially in the time of, when Bhagavad Gita was spoken, the leaders, they were called, even the kings were referred to as Rajarshis or Rajarishis, means they were saints in the role of king. And so they knew very well, like the next verse, it mentions one Janak Maharaj. These saints were well aware that they were not the supreme controllers. They were not almighty conquerors who could um, who could automatically protect their subjects from anything. They would give their life to do so, but at the same time, they recognized that they themselves were not all powerful to do so. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's one section islands of geometrically positive various different forms of the divine. And there's one area where Lakshmi Devi is often referred to in the form of Kamadev. And Kamadev is translated as Cupid in Western theology or mythology. Cupid. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Mm, let me see. Let me know when you can hear me well. Mm, still kind of choppy. Okay, can you hear me well now? Okay, okay. So okay, hopefully it stays good from there. Um, and yes, so they yes, in Western ideology, Cupid is sort of like or I guess it's more maybe Greek mythology, but Cupid is considered the god of romantic love. In Vedic theology, Kamadev or Cupid is basically the god of all sensual attraction and is considered a manifestation of Lord Rishikesh, the divine master of all sensory activity. And so Lakshmi Devi prays to him that actually, Lord Rishikesh, you are the only one who can be considered the husband of all living entities because you are above time, you're above the influence of the three modes of material nature, you're above the influence of karma, of all fruitive activities, and thus you are the only one who's able to protect someone. All the leaders of this world, the men of this world, they're under the influence of their own karma. They're under the influence of the three modes of material nature. So they themselves are not actually truly capable of protecting anyone. And so, once upon a time in ancient times, the leaders they were aware of this, that they themselves were only instrumental in fulfilling the will of the Supreme Lord. And so with this mentality, they were able to act without attachment for the results, to act without attachment for profit, adoration, and distinction, even from their subjects, recognizing that I'm only an instrument in the will of the Lord and I am truly a servant of the dependents that I serve. And so, with this in mind, they were able um, to actually attain the supreme by the fulfillment of their duty, even as kings. And this is relevant for the Gita that Krishna is talking to Arjuna, who is, he is one of the more or less one of the Rajarshis in service of Arjuna's brother Yudhishthira Maharaj. Arjuna was a saintly king, and Krishna was encouraging him in that line. And so, in text 20, Krishna he expands on this idea, talking about how those kings would they would teach the populace by example, and that really is the main principle for today. It's what we call the acharya principle, that one has to teach by example. And so, see if we can pull up verse 20. So in verse 20, Lord Krishna says, "Karma naiva hi sangsiddhim astita janakadayaha loka sangrahamevapi sampashyan kartumarhasi." Even kings like Janaka and others attained the perfectional stage by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. Shri Krishna, he's telling Arjuna here that look, you don't have, you know, you don't have the nature to just go off to the forest and meditate and sort of separate your identity from matter in that way. For you, the path of enlightenment is actually you know, through selfless action. By such selfless action, you purify your heart and ultimately you come closer to the divine. And Krishna, he's giving the example of Janak Maharaj because Janak Maharaj was already perfected. In one sense, in one sense, it said he attained the perfectional stage. In another sense, he was one of those great kings who was already in the perfectional stage. Janak Maharaj was considered one of the great Mahajans, one of the great personalities in whose example we must follow in order to walk the path of enlightenment and bhakti. And yet, just to teach the people in general, he was performing all of his duties in the kingdom, even in cases where he wasn't able to negotiate fairly with others, or that others would not fairly negotiate with him. Janak Maharaj had to fight sometimes. It's the same we see with the Pandavas in the case of Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, that they tried everything they could, even with Krishna's help, to negotiate with the opposing camp, but there was no negotiating. And so in that case, they fulfilled their duty, and they fought under the will of Krishna. And so the principle to take from this is that the the leader, they have to very carefully think, okay, well, what is it that I want to convey to my dependents? And again, the dependents could be a whole kingdom under them. It could be their own household. Um, it could be, you know, whoever our dependents are, even if it's, say a leader of a company or something like that, getting into modern day, that whatever we're looking for from, say, employees, if I'm looking for a certain spirit of enthusiasm, spirit of proactivity, am I actually exemplifying that? Am I sort of leading the pack in that regard? Um, that's it definitely makes it a big deal. I know I've spent some of my youth in different ashrams as I was learning about Bhakti Yoga, and it always made a big difference when any of the leading devotees there were really enthusiastic. They just kind of sun up to sundown. Well, realistically, before sun up to after sundown, they weren't just telling us, okay, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, you need to do that. No, they were on the ground running with us, and so it would kick the rest of us into gear. It's like, okay, well, if the people who are in charge of me are working this hard, they're working a lot harder than I'm even ready to work. I need to at least do something to try and follow them. And so that kind of leading by example, it's sort of like you see them running, so your feet just start moving anyways. So I know that's been definitely my experience where, yeah, when I had powerful leaders like that, um, yeah, it's like my feet just start moving when I see how diligently they're working, and it sort of gets you in the mentality of, okay, well, how do I help? How do I help? Because I can't just let them take it all on for themselves. So, yeah, this is a very powerful, very a very powerful way of leading that goes a lot farther than simply do as I say, not as I do. And this then gets into verse 21, which is a very, very famous verse of the Bhagavad Gita, often quoted. Um, so if we can pull that up. Here Krishna very famously says, Yad yad acharati shreshtas tat tadeve tarojana, sayat pramanam kurute lokas tadanuvartate. Whatever action is performed by a great man, common men follow in his footsteps, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. And so again, this is just natural. The what was it, Jiveras Furupahoy Krishnera Nityadas, that the constitutional position of the jiva, the spirit soul, that the conscious being that observes the whole human experience, the very nature of that conscious being is to be a servant of the divine, of Sri Krishna. And Sri Krishna, he says in the Bhagavad Gita that anything you see in this world that is very wonderful, splendorous, beautiful, powerful, that's a spark of Krishna's splendor. So whenever somebody sees, in this case, it's the amazing example of a leader, then it's just natural for the soul to be enamored by that and want to try to follow in that example. I mean, even commonly, when kids will talk about, oh, this person's my hero, or who do you want to be like when you grow up? And so we all have, even in our adulthood, we sort of have that little kind of childlike tendency. We tend to have an idol, we tend to have a hero, we tend to have somebody who we put on a pedestal and admire. And so in his explanation of this verse, our commentator Srila Prabhupada, and he he talks about how we must follow the footsteps of great devotees, and that Krishna, in his form of Lord Chaitanya, said that again, a teacher should behave properly even before he begins teaching. And he gives the example that, yeah, if you want to teach someone not to smoke, you can't be smoking. That it's not just what we say, but how we do it. And yeah, definitely in terms of parenthood, I had some, in the course of getting my internship, I had some times where I was working with troubled children and their families, And I definitely saw parents who did lead by example, and they were able to guide their children, and I saw parents who were not willing to lead by example. They wanted to tell and not follow themselves, and it was night and day, the difference in results that they had, because children, even if they don't have the vocabulary to articulate all that they're seeing and feeling, they are seeing and feeling everything. Children, they're very perceptive, even if they don't have the adult language to convey it. um, yeah, I definitely remember clearly where, some parental figures would be very critical of their children for something, but then in the course of talking, I would find out that the, parental figure was doing the same thing, and they would have some justification. Well, it's okay for me to do it because yada yada yada. I think it's beautiful for me to do this, but not for the kid. And I would just be kind of shocked at the level of hypocrisy. And naturally, the kid would just wreak absolute havoc in the home because they knew there was no there was no fair authority here. There wasn't really a leader to follow here, and so it was very, very chaotic in that home. Um, on the other hand, in other homes where the parents were, where the parent one where yeah, where the parents were actually following what they wanted the kid to do, the kids were more likely to follow. And then specifically with parenthood as well, another important aspect of leadership is unity. That definitely with children, if they see that the parents are not united, if they see the parents are bickering or that they can't reach a conclusion together, then the children will learn to pair one parent against the other. And I definitely saw this time and time again. I sometimes had to sit the parents together and say, look, it almost doesn't matter what you tell your kid. You could decide to be extremely lenient with them. You could just try to be militarily strict with them. You could do whatever you want, but you have to do it together, because until the two of you actually just start deciding together, nothing's going to work, and your child will continue to remain the one in charge of this household. And I remember, I had a coming to Jesus moment with them, as they say, and the parents really sat down and, for the first time in a long time, they agreed on how to parent their child, and so they were able to move forward from there. um and so yeah, whenever we're leading it, and this is an example of parenthood, but again, that could be parenthood, that could be maybe, there's co-owners of a company, or if there's multiple members of you know political management or something like that. Unity is a very important leadership principle, that when people see a unified front, then it gives them faith, it gives them a sense of security that, okay, they're all on board with this. I want to be on board with this too. Whenever the dependents see that, okay, it's not a unified front, these people, maybe at best they're pretending to get along, or maybe they publicly don't get along, whether that's my parents, my teaching organization, the co-owners of my company. If I see they don't get along, then it's going to inspire me to not get along. It's going to inspire me to be, it's like, well, okay, if each of the leaders, them, that can be my parents, that can be my teacher organization, whatever it is. Although the managers of my company, if I see that they don't get along with each other, they basically, each of them is doing whatever they want and trying to sort of move their weight, so to speak, to push their own agenda. I'm going to follow by example. I'm going to do whatever I want. And as an employee, maybe I'll have to do it a little more secretly. As a kid, maybe I'll have to do it a little more secretly. If I see my parents aren't communicating that well, and one parent says no to me, I can just go to the other parent in private. They probably won't even they won't even communicate it to the other parent. So I'll just get the yes from them, and I'll just deal with the complaints from the other later. So if I see each leader just doing whatever they want, acting on their own selfish whims, not regarding the other leader, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'm not going to regard the other leaders or the other people in this organization, in this family, or in this country, or whatever it may be. Even that could be in this ashram. I mean, as much as people in an ashram setting may be attempting to walk the path of enlightenment, still, we're just because we're all in the shower, it doesn't mean we're all fully clean yet. And so these principles definitely apply to ashram settings as well, where people can definitely sense when there is unity among the leaders of an ashram, and they can definitely sense where there is not such unity. And so So yeah, just again, in all such cases, the leaders can say whatever they want, but the dependents can sense it. Dependents can feel it, and the dependents will at least be tempted to follow in the footsteps of, again, that sort of selfish, um, whimsical way of kind of doing whatever I want and getting away with it. And in this connection, there's another verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Gurorna sasyat swajanona sasyat pitana sasyat jananina sasyat daivamna tatsyanna patishcha sasyat namochayadya samupetam rityum, where Bhagavan Rishabhadev says that one should not become a spiritual master, a superior relative, a father, a mother, a husband, a worshipable demigod if they are not able to deliver their dependents from the cycle of birth and death. This is a very, a very powerful and heavy statement from the Srimad Bhagavatam that um, basically one should not accept dependence in any form if they're not able to liberate them from the path of birth and death. It's a very heavy responsibility. And actually, just last night, my wife and I, we were reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam about the movements of the living entity from the third canto, 31st chapter, where it describes in great detail the experience of the living entity inside the womb of the mother as they're packed up tightly in the abdomen, covered in all kinds of inner fluids and excrements and things like that. There's worms and stuff inside the womb. The baby's back is arched in a very painful way that if an adult was put into such a condition, they would die almost immediately. But the baby has to tolerate this for around 9-10 months. And then as when the baby comes out of the womb, due to the excruciating pain, they forget everything they experienced in the womb, and they are put into all kinds of awkward situations where they're trying to cry for one thing. They're crying for milk, but then their caretaker thinks they're sick and gives them bitter medicine instead, and the baby can't even refuse it, so they have to accept this thing they don't want. And then in childhood, they start to develop, they start to become playful, but then when their desires for play are not fulfilled, they feel great anger and sadness. And it talks about how, as the false ego builds throughout the life, the living entity, they just build more and more attachments. They start to lose their good qualities. And then by developing such a negative mentality, they have to take, the body dies and the soul takes birth in the womb of another mother, either in a lower species or in a human form of life. And they have to go through this suffering again and again and again. And so, and, in that chapter, it was reiterated that, yeah, any kind of leader, especially the parents, need to be pointing their children in the direction of ending this cycle of birth and death, of not simply accumulating new attachments and fortifying our false ego, but of actually, you know, learning to act without material attachment and learning to act with attachment for Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, he had one very beautiful purport in there that, um, it's very natural to be, to be attracted by the forms of this world. Maybe, for man, that attraction is woman. For woman, that attraction is man. Whatever the case may be, it's very natural to be attracted to the forms of this world. And once we become yeah, he says that Janmad Yasyataha, that whatever we see in this world, it has its origin in the absolute truth. So even Sri Krishna himself must have the tendency to be attracted by a woman, to even want to be sort of attracted and subdued by a woman. And so Srila Prabhupada said he creates such a woman from his internal potency. And again, I say create in quotes because in the spiritual world, it's not as if anything in the spiritual world didn't exist and then came into existence, but you could say manifested, that Sri Krishna has to create or manifest such a divine woman from his own internal potency, and that woman is known as Srimati Radharani. And he said that once we become attracted by the beauty of the divine couple, Sri Sri Radha and Krishna, then we start to develop a spiritual attachment, and that then sort of soothes the blazing fire of material existence, that soothes the material attachments that plague our heart. And so, even if we ourselves are not necessarily, liberated souls, so to speak, you know, we are responsible both for ourselves and for any dependence that we may have to at least be walking the path and pointing them along the path of of enlightenment, of bhakti yoga. And so in that way we can at least be, doing some good to help our dependents to come out of this cycle of birth and death and find their ultimate fulfillment. Again, the we have that childlike tendency to be enamored by any great or beautiful thing, and so it's our responsibility to give our dependents the supreme beauty, give them the chance to actually hear about Radha and Krishna from pure devotees, and thus not just see with their material eyes, but have an experience of that divine beauty that truly captivates the heart. So with that, I will pause there. If there are any questions or comments, I would be glad to take them.
Thank you so much, Abhimanyu. At the moment, I don't see any questions posted, but as always, if somebody wants to post something, we can answer later on. Let me see. Thank you so much. So, and thank you for sharing this with us. Um, it is wonderful thinking about, that at some point in your life you are following the steps of somebody else, but at a certain point somebody else is going to be following your steps and you may not even know it.
Yes.
You may be an example for somebody else and reflecting on, wow, what a big responsibility that is, and makes you think about, okay, how I am going on my own path, because
Yes.
my path is also going to be a shining light for others that are going a little bit behind. And how things that I do every single day not only affects my path, but others that may see me also on their own reflection. So it's a nice way of thinking about the responsibility, not just because I have some duties that I have to do, because of
Mhm.
thinking, wow, how this will reflect in others and the life of others. So I thank you very much. That's, for me personally, something really,
Mhm.
really, really important to think every single day.
Yes.
Um, and with that, I believe we will be closing for today. Thank you so much for sharing us with us today. Have a wonderful day, everybody. I will see you in another time in Ashram Talks.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.